All right, folks, we're logged in and we're live right now, and looks like we have 4 people watching. Seminar scheduled to start at 7 o'clock, so just bear with us, and we will get started at 7 p.m. If you can't hear me or see me or something is wrong, please post a comment because we might be able to get it squared away before we get started. But otherwise, we'll just hold tight for a few minutes until we get things rocking and rolling at 7 p.m. So once again, for those of you just joining, we're going to kind of just hang tight till 7 o'clock. I'm not very good at singing and dancing, or I would be glad to do that for you. I don't think you want me to. You'd probably log off in a big hurry. So we'll hold tight. The seminar will begin promptly at 7. If you're waiting and you've got friends that may like to listen in, hear what we've got to say, go ahead and share the link with your friends. Share it with your fishing clubs, share it with your angling buddies, your brother-in-law, anybody you can think of that may be interested in heading up to Devil's Lake in the next, I'd say a week or two. This information will last for a while. So hang tight, about 2 more minutes. We'll get started promptly at 7 o'clock. All right, folks, it's 7 o'clock. We'll go ahead and get started. I'd like to welcome everyone to the first of a live seminar series for this spring, summer, and fall. My name's Johnnie Candle. I'm a professional angler and a fishing guide here on Devil's Lake. And this seminar is brought to you by the Devil's Lake Tourism Bureau. So hopefully you're watching through their site. We're also streaming through a few other sites that we're cross-sharing with. Devil's Lake Chamber Tournament site, my Pro Fisherman site, and the Lake Region Anglers Association here in Devil's Lake are also showing the seminar on their Facebook pages. You will also be able to review this again later. If you missed something I said or you want to share it with a friend later on, it will be stored on all those sites on Facebook and can be visited at any time. I want to apologize before we get started for the weather. I know none of us can control that. The intention of this seminar was to come to you live from the water so we could actually demonstrate some of the techniques, let you see visually some of the areas that the fish have been cooperating in so far this spring. But if you don't follow North Dakota weather, you can probably guess the wind blew a little bit today. Here in Devil's Lake, we had wind gusts over 50 miles an hour. It's still howling out there right now. Hopefully it dies down so we can get out there the rest of this week and enjoy some good early spring fishing. Again, because we're in the studio, things will be a little bit different, but we're going to do the best we can with what we have. First thing I want to talk about are some general lake trends, maybe a little history of Devil's Lake, where the fish start, where they move to, and why we may be fishing where we're fishing this time of year. So for those of you that are fairly familiar with Devil's Lake, bear with me as we go through this information. But the history of Devil's Lake also helps us figure out where the fish may be this time of year and why. Devil's Lake 30, 40 years ago was not near the lake that it is today. Much, much smaller in size. At one time, probably 40,000 acres or smaller. In the early 90s, the lake began flooding, and the water comes in from runoff around the lake. There's two main areas where that water comes in. One would be the north end of 6 Mile Bay, also known as Channel A, and the other water comes from the north and west of Devil's Lake through a chain of lakes and then what is known as the Mabe Coulee. For those of you that don't know, a coulee is a stream that only runs during rainy season. So water would come through the coulee. Once summertime would come, it would dry up and quit running. Over the course of many years, decades, Devil's Lake filled up to be at one point probably a little bit over 200,000 acres of water. Now we're on the downhill side again, and the water's slowly receding, and we're probably in that 150 to 160,000 acre range today. But the cycle of runoff, water coming into the lake rising, has gotten our fish kind of used to expecting that runoff. And when the runoff typically comes, it draws those fish towards those areas. So again, 6 Mile Bay and Channel A, and that northwest corner of what is now known as Pelican Lake, traditionally receive most of the fishing pressure this time of year. Well, if you don't know, we didn't have much winter in North Dakota this last year, which meant we didn't have much runoff. It's been very, very dry across the region so far this spring, and again, no runoff. We got a half an inch of rain last week, and based on how it looked in my yard, that water didn't get anywhere near the lake unless it fell in the lake. So we don't have that rise in water. We don't have the runoff that we typically have, and that is changing the way the lake fishes a little bit this spring. The traditional patterns are still the same, but not quite such of a strong draw to the north end of 6 Mile Bay and to the northwest corner of Pelican Lake. With no current, there's not as many fish being drawn to those areas. So that being said, where would you start looking if you came to Devil's Lake this week? Well, I'm not going to give specific spots, because if I do that, all of my fishing guide buddies and my good friends that share information with would probably hang me upside down in a tree and leave me there for the rest of the summer. But I don't have any problem sharing very general areas with people. Waypoints I'm not giving out. I'm not going to tell you go to the third tree from the left of the bridge and tie up to it, throw a bobber out there. But I will share very general areas on where these fish are. And they are typical spring spots. But again, don't expect big congregations of fish. The northwest part of Devil's Lake is still probably your best bet for early spring walleye. The reason being is it's the shallowest, it's protected from the wind the most, it has the most shallow bays off of the main lake, which warm quicker, and that is just going to get activity started sooner. Water temperatures right now in the main lake are in the mid-50s. If you get off of the main bay of Devil's Lake into some of the shallower bays, typically north and west from the main bay of Devil's Lake, you could find water in the low 60s. Now, this wind is going to change things. We've got some cold nights coming, so I expect those water temperatures to drop drastically, but you still will want to look for the warmest water you can possibly find when you get to Devil's Lake in the next couple of weeks. I don't start ignoring water temperature until probably the second half of June. So from now through Father's Day for sure, I will look for the warmest water I can find. That might mean visiting 2 or 3 different bays before you find a water temperature that you feel is the warmest water you can find. Once you find that warm water, I start looking for water color. If the water is crystal clear and you think you're going to fish in water less than 4 or 5 feet, it's very, very hard to get close to those fish if the water's crystal clear. So I look for warm water first and then water with a little bit of color, and that will help us locate the walleyes as we keep moving forward. Some general areas that I like to start. We'll start in the upper northwest part. I do not fish the chain of lakes that are attached to Devil's Lake. I fish Devil's Lake proper. Pelican Lake, great area to look for early spring walleye. The whole part of Pelican Lake is nothing more than a shallow bay off of Devil's Lake. Any of the shorelines in Pelican Lake can be really good. I love to play the wind. If the wind's out of the south, any direction with the south in it, you're probably going to find my boat casting something towards the railroad grade. Be very cautious when you get near the railroad grade this year. If you think you can drive over it, you're mistaken. It will eat a propeller. It will eat a lower unit. It is not crossable. Probably visible for most of the length of the railroad grade. But the rocks that you want to fish are still in the water. So the railroad grade, very, very good place to start. Old Highway 281, again, flooded road. Can't get over it anymore, but it's lined with riprap. Highway 19, again, a road that not flooded, but lined with riprap. All those shorelines with rock and wind equal walleye success. I love to cast to the shorelines around Refuge Island. Again, playing the wind. If it's from the northwest, I'll fish the northwest side. Wind out of the east shoreline of Refuge Island can be really, really good. Foss's Island is another spot in Pelican Lake that you want to watch when you're navigating. It's been underwater for many years. It's now above water, but it's a great place to cast to as well. Just about any shoreline in Pelican Lake has the possibility and the potential of producing some very, very good walleye catches this time of year. And there have been plenty of fish caught in Pelican Lake already this season. As we move to the south, the Mauvais Coulee area is phenomenal. There's bays on the east side, bays on the west side, south of the bridge. Either of those bays at any time right now have walleye in them. There were some great reports over the weekend of plenty of walleyes coming out of these shallow mud bottom bays. And you have to remember, the only reason the walleye are in there is because they warm up first. They warm up, they attract bait, and the walleye go in there and feed on whatever they can find. The other thing to remember is these bays are typically the same depth from shoreline to shoreline, which means the walleye are not always related to the shoreline. Don't be afraid to put your offerings out towards the middle of the bay. Cast to the middle of the bay. Put a bobber in the middle of the bay. You never know where those fish might be roaming around. And who knows, a lot of times the first guy to cast to the deep side of the boat, or what feels like the deep side of the boat, is the first guy in the boat to locate the fish. So fish both sides. As we move out of the Mauvais Coulee, the north shore of Graham's Island, and the south shore of Golden Pond, again, wind-driven, nice shallow shorelines, sandy, gravelly bottoms. Water's going to be a little warmer there. Great places to look for walleye. Moving out into the Minnewacan Flats towards the south, famous Howard's Farm or Howard's Bay. Be very, very careful entering Howard's Bay. Again, the water is way down. There is a sunken island, which probably isn't sunken so much anymore at the mouth of Howard's Bay. Exercise caution when going around that. But once you get into the bay itself, there's still plenty of water back there, and lots of walleye to be caught in Howard's Bay. It is much warmer in there right now than it is in the main lake. Moving back to the east, South Shore, Holly Bay, same thing. Getting in and out is not so tricky other than tree stumps. Plenty of water depth there. Getting through the Z-Box Pass and heading a little bit to the east, We have New Mill Bay. Careful going in and out. Water's pretty shallow there. You can only enter New Mill Bay from the north. Do not try to come in from the east. The sandbar is showing pretty much all the way along the east side of New Mill Bay. So exercise caution coming in that direction. And again, I would advise not to. If you are on the outside of New Mill Bay to the east, you might as well poke your head in Knutson's Bay to the south of New Mill Bay. Another great, phenomenal early spring spot. Wind will be definitely less in there. Water temperatures will be warmer. And last but not least, we already talked about it, but the north end of 6 Mile Bay, you've got the world famous Pepsi Barn up there. If you've ever been to Devil's Lake, you know all about the Pepsi Barn. If you haven't been to Devil's Lake and you put your boat in 6 Mile Bay, as soon as you see it, you're going to say, ah, that's the Pepsi Barn. It's pretty obvious where it's at. Caution going up to Channel A in the north end of 6 Mile. There is an old railroad grade that goes across that you have to get over to get into Channel A proper. So be very, very careful crossing that railroad grade. And a word of caution, when you get to Highway 2, you're not going to get any further north. It's all rock. You can get out and walk under the bridge without getting your shoes wet. It's very, very dry up there. But again, there is a little bit of trickle coming through, not a lot. There's a little water coming in, and it is going to be a little bit warmer up there than everywhere else. I'm going to stop with right there. I'm not going to say that there aren't any shallow bays worthy of fishing going east of 6 Mile Bay or Knutson's Bay. There is plenty of shallow water there, but I don't find it the best really early. It seems like the shallower portions, the north end of Creel Bay, maybe when you get over to Penny Bay, when you start going further east to Skadson's Bay, when you get to Haybale Bay, even further east of that, Black Tiger Bay, the south end, and even going into East Devil's Lake, those bays seem to take a little longer to warm up. They're all closer to deeper water, so they take a little longer to warm up. What I really enjoy about Devil's Lake is I chase the shallow bite in the northwest corner of the lake first. When it starts to slow down there, I start looking in those shallower spots as I move to the east. And if you really like to cast shallow, you can extend that shallow bite by traveling further and further east into the month of June. So there's plenty of shallow fish all across the lake, but again, early, go west. As it warms up, move a little bit to the east. So that's a quick rundown of the areas that we may fish. How do we go about fishing these? Well, again, they're shallow mud bays, very little rock. There is some, and if you find it, it can be a fish magnet. There's several different ways that we go about fishing these areas. But spring is pretty simple on Devil's Lake, and I've brought a couple rods and reels into the studio tonight, and I'm going to share with you what I do in the spring. And I've got it narrowed down to 3 main options. I'm either casting a jig in a soft plastic tail, I'm casting a crankbait, or I'm fishing with a slip bobber. Those are the 3 things that I'm going to do. I'm going to utilize those techniques, and those are the ways that I go about. Did you get it, Jay? Oh, my cameraman's helping me out. Yep, we got it. Everything's back up and running, so we're good. Just so you guys know, I've got my good friend Jay Hagan. Some of you are probably friends with Jay. He's in the studio with me, helping me out. And one thing I forgot to mention, if you guys do have questions, or gals, I'm assuming there's some guys and gals watching, go ahead and type it in the comment section. I can see what's going on here, and I will glance down periodically and answer questions as we go along. So go ahead and fire away questions at any time while we're going through the seminar. But anyways, those are the 3 main techniques. I'm going to talk about the equipment that I use a little bit first. For my main line, and this is pretty much what I use all the time, I'm using Fireline, 10-pound test. I love the new Ultra 8 Fireline. Really, really smooth, casts really, really well. Just does a great job. I like something I can see, so the white instead of the smoke, I can see that. So when I'm casting in the wind, you can see if your line's got a bow in it or if you cast it over a tree or in the weeds. But Fireline for my main line all the time. And then for a leader, I'm running some kind of fluorocarbon. So I've got trilene fluorocarbon here. This happens to be 10 pound. If I'm pitching a jig, usually 10 pound. If I'm going to throw a crankbait, I might even go as high as 17 or 20 pound test. The fluorocarbon is only for one reason, and one reason only, and that is to help prevent bite-offs from northern pike. There are a lot of pike in the system. You are going to catch them mixed in with the walleyes, so be prepared to catch some northern pike this time of year. And that fluorocarbon just will save a couple jigs and a couple crankbaits. Tying a leader on, use a back-to-back uni knot, use a crazy Alberto knot, the FG knot, whatever you like to tie two lines together works well. But put a little fluorocarbon in front of your jigs and crankbaits, you'll save a lot of lures over time. We'll get into rods and reels next, and we'll get into some of the things that I throw on a rod and reel. First thing we'll talk about will be pitching jigs. So I've got here I don't even know if I can get that in this frame. Probably not. We'll just go with the main camera. This is my jig pitching rod here. This is a 6 foot 10 inch medium light, extra fast. It happens to be a Shields Ibisu rod. Brand is not all that important, but you want something a little bit longer, 6.5, 7, maybe even 7.5 feet, that you can throw that jig a long distance. I will say this, whether you're jig fishing, crankbait fishing, or bobber fishing, some days the farther you get the jig or the lure or the bobber away from the boat, the more fish you're going to catch. A longer rod will allow you to throw much further. I have a size 2500 reel on here. Again, fire line for my main line. I've got a fluorocarbon leader. And then for jigs, I prefer 1/4 ounce most days. If it's really, really calm, I can drop down to 3/16. When it gets really, really windy, maybe up to 3/8. But I don't go much lighter than 3/16, and very, very rarely will I go heavier than 3/8 when I'm casting shallow. What will I attach to the business end of that? Well, some kind of soft plastic tail. And I'm going to show you a bunch of soft plastic tails right now. We'll go through these. I had a question already that said, what plastics do I prefer for Devil's Lake? And JF, here's the first one. These are Pro Swimmers from Shields. There's a lot of companies that make this fat, ribbed style swim bait, and I'll hold this one in my hand so you can see it a little better there. Anywhere from 2.5 inches all the way up to about 4 inches are what I prefer. If you look in my box here, you're going to tell that most of the ones I like are white or have some semblance of white on them. Next favorite color would be something that looks like a perch, so chartreuses and oranges and things like that. Very, very good bait. Nice, big, wide tail. They wiggle really well at slow speeds and catch a ton of fish. The next bait that I like a lot is the Berkeley Ripple Shad. Got a great selection of those. And again, you're going to see primarily two colors in there. We've got whites, white, 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 and perch, 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 perch. Pretty straightforward. These are the 3.5 inch. They fish really, really well on a 1/4 ounce head. Can't say enough about a Berkeley Ripple Shad. It's one of the baits I reach for, probably right behind the swimmer style baits. Got another box here that's got some various lures in it. Some of you are very familiar with the Walleye Assassin baits. There's one right there. I think that's called a Turbo Shad, if I'm not mistaken. And you can tell that that looks a lot like a perch. These are Shields Swimmin' Minnows. Has a very, very thin, I'll hold it up here so you can see it. It has a very, very thin tail with a wide paddle. So the tail wiggles real hard while the body stays still. And it's a completely different look than some of the other baits. But I've had really, really good luck with those as well. Same colors, whites, perches. That pretty much sums it up for my soft plastics. Again, 1/4 ounce head, a Couple tricks. One thing I like to do, and some people look at me like I've lost my mind, and if you know me, some days you might think I really have, but I am a stickler for getting my plastic on my jig straight. I might rehook that thing 3 or 4 times. I don't like it to have a kink in it. I don't like it to be crooked. I don't like it to have a curl in the back end. I like the plastic to be straight on the jig, and I honestly think that makes a difference some days in how many fish you catch. If the jig or the body gets tore up and you're running low on tails, from time to time, I've been known to put them on upside down, and I've also been known to hook them sideways. I'm not going to say it's better or worse, but I'm going to say it's always worth a try. There are some days that you'll catch a handful of fish with your tail hooked the proper way, and it gets tore up, so you hook it sideways, and all of a sudden you catch 3 times the number of fish you caught before. The lures definitely fall through the water differently when they're hooked sideways or upside down. The angle of that tail will make the bait drop or swim differently through the water. There is absolutely no way to know which day is going to be the right way to rig your plastic on your jig head, but it's always worth trying something a little bit different. Another tip, when you put the jig in the water, let it free fall. If the tail does not wiggle just from the weight of the head, you need to use a heavier jig head. Some of these plastics can be fairly stiff, and a 1/4 ounce head may not make that tail wiggle on the drop. If the tail is not wiggling just from the weight of the jig, there's a couple things you can do. Number 1, put a heavier jig in. Number 2, stretch the plastic, right? Pull on the tail, stretch it, massage it, move it around, loosen it up. All of those soft plastics have salt, they have scent, they have flavor enhancements, and loosening that chemical bond will make that plastic softer and the tail will wiggle better. So that's always a nice thing to try. If your tail's not wiggling quite the way you want, give it a massage. Take it to the spa for the day, loosen things up, and see if that doesn't help you catch a few more fish. So JF, did that answer your question? I hope. I got you some plastics there for Devil's Lake. Again, if anyone else has questions, and Jay, you're following along too, let me know if I'm missing any questions as we go. The next thing is casting crankbaits. Crankbait setup's just a little bit different than my jig fishing setup, but not a whole lot. Again, I have a 7-foot rod here, but it's not extra fast action, it's moderate action. So the rod bends from one end to the other. It's parabolic, bends in a big horseshoe. Why do I like that? Well, number 1, I can cast farther. And when we're using little tiny crankbaits like we're going to talk about here, being able to cast farther is a really big deal. Number 2, when a fish hits and you set the hook, the rod's got a little more give to it. If you have that extra fast rod that only bends in the tip, when you set the hook, there's a really good chance you could pull that crankbait away from the fish. And you don't want to pull lures out of their mouth. You want to make sure that that lure stays in their mouth and they get hooks in them very, very well. So 7-foot, medium power, moderate action. I use a little bit bigger reel. This is a size 3000 reel. A reason for the bigger reel is, again, so I can cast further. The spool is a little bit bigger around. I don't know if you can see that or not, but it's a little bit bigger around than the 2500. The line comes off better, throw it a lot farther. Still that same Fireline main line, fluorocarbon leader, and then the crankbaits that I use. And this is where it gets fun. I brought just a small selection with me. First ones talk about are size 5 Berkeley flicker shads, or size 5 actually in any deep diving crankbait. Flicker shad, shad wrap. There's Walleye Nation Creations makes the boogie shad. Oh man, Wally divers are known to catch fish here. They all work really, really well. But again, that size 5 seems to be great for when you're casting up to the bank, when you're in water less than 7 feet. They'll dive 5 feet on a cast, which gets you right down near the bottom. And once again, you can see the colors I've got. White, 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 white. Perch, 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 perch. I mean, it's pretty straightforward here on Devil's Lake, folks. If you got something white, something perch, you're going to be able to catch some fish. Next box. Shallow Shallow Shad Wraps. Gotta love the shallow Shad Wrap. 5s, 7s, and even 9s. And what is the key with the shallow Shad Wrap? Well, it doesn't dive quite as deep, and the whole reason for it is the little crooked bill in the front. I don't know if you can see that real well or not, but it's got that crinkled lip or crooked lip, whatever you want to call it. The bait does not dive all that deep, maybe 4 feet on a really, really long cast. Keeps it up off the weeds when the weeds start to grow. They throw really good because they're aerodynamic, and again, catch a lot of fish on those. A new bait that I started to catch on really, really well last spring, very similar, is the shallow flicker shad. Let's see if I can get one of these out of the box. The deep diving flicker shad has been a favorite forever. Now they've got one with a shallow diving bill. One thing Berkeley did really, really well with this crankbait, the lure wiggles almost exactly like the deep diving version, but it's got a shallow bill. Most lures, when they switch from shallow to deep, although the shape is the same, they don't wiggle the same. And these baits keep that same flicker wiggle. There's no doubt about it that flicker shads catch a lot of fish. That's why I own boxes and boxes of them. And the shallow flicker shad works really well. It might work a little bit better than the deep diving version just because it's heavier. Being plastic instead of balsa, you can throw it further. And I use both the 5 and 7 in the shallow flicker shad. Couple other shallow lures that I really enjoy, or one that I really enjoy that I didn't bring into the studio tonight, I probably should have, is the Rapala Esco. They were an exclusive product of Shields for several years. They developed a really, really big following on Devil's Lake. Phenomenal bait. Probably 2 or 3 weeks from now, when the weeds start to grow, they swim over the top. They look like a countdown Rapala and fish like a shallow Shad Wrap. So a little bit of best of both worlds. And then the last bait I want to talk about, and this is one that I don't think a lot of folks fish on Devil's Lake, some kind of suspending jerkbait. These happen to be Berkeley cutters. This is the 110 size. They also make a 90, a cutter 90. But these are suspending jerkbaits, right? So you cast them out, you crank them down, you twitch them 3 or 4 times, and when you pause, they sit there. They don't float up, they don't sink to the bottom, they suspend in one spot. Most of the time, fish hit them on the pause. So you twitch, 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 you pause them, and the fish just cannot stare at it long enough without losing their mind and eating it. It's kind of like when my wife puts a piece of cheesecake in front of me and says, "You can't have this." The longer it sits there, the harder it is for me to not stick a fork in it. It's the same way with these suspending jerkbaits. When the bite seems to be off a little bit, throw the jerkbait out, rip it a few times, get their attention, and then stop it and let it sit there. Some days 3 or 4 seconds, other days 15 or 20. In the bass fishing world, guys claim they let them sit for as long as 30 seconds. And either they'll hit it when it's sitting still, or right when you go to move it the next time and they think it's getting away, they pounce on it. The bites are usually really, really ferocious. So I love to throw suspending jerkbaits early in the season, especially when the water's a little cooler. But they catch a lot of fish for me at Devil's Lake. Any crankbait questions? I don't see any questions rolling across the screen. So either I'm doing a really, really good job explaining everything to people, or no one's got any questions. Last thing I want to talk about tonight are slip bobbers. Slip bobbers are a Devil's Lake staple. There's no doubt about it. They work well year-round. I am going to put a Leech under my slip bobber this time of year, without doubt. Some folks will use a minnow every now and again. Later in the summer, a piece of crawler will catch fish on a slip float, but 99.9% of the time in my boat, I am putting a Leech on below my slip bobber. So let me run you through my slip bobber setup real quick. Rod is a little longer. This is a 7.5 foot spinning rod. It's medium power. It's also moderate action, so it bends from one end to the other. Reason for that is when I put a piece of live bait on there, I can make a really light lob cast. I don't throw the bait off, but I can still get it really, really far from the boat. Again, main line, super line. This is Fireline. It's colored Fireline. I like a brightly colored main line for my slip float. Couple reasons. First reason, Fireline floats. Because it floats, I can trace it to my bobber. If it's a brightly colored line, it's even easier to trace to the bobber. If you really want to get crazy with your slip float setups, if you put a different color line on each rod, you can tell which bobber's missing much easier. Start tracing the chartreuse line, there's a bobber. You start tracing the orange line, there's a bobber. You start tracing the white line, there's no bobber, so you tell whoever in the boat has the reel with white line, your bobber's down, and you're going to be able to catch fish a little quicker. The other reason I like Superline for my main line is it doesn't stretch, right? You've got your bobber a long way out there. There's usually some slack between your rod tip and the float when it goes under. So if you don't get all the slack out with no stretch and a longer rod, you get a much better hook set. And then it's much tougher. It doesn't break, so you don't lose as much tackle. So I've got my main line. I'll have my bobber stop on. That goes on first when you're rigging your bobber. You slide the bobber stop on first. Then I slide a bead, if you can see it there. There's a bead right there. Then my bobber, okay? Then I put a swivel. The swivel is there, so if I break off, the bobber doesn't slide off, and I won't lose all of this equipment here on the top. I don't have to start over. Below the swivel, I have about a 2-foot leader of fluorocarbon. Again, 10, 12 pound. It doesn't have to be light. It's invisible underwater, so don't have to worry about fish being line shy. I'll pinch a couple of split shots, and early in the spring, it seems like a plain hook on the business end works a little bit better than a jig. Later in the season, I'll put a jig head on there, but early in the season, it seems like just a plain hook, a size number 4, a size number 2 hook. Put a nice juicy leech on there, let it swim around. Throw these all around your boat. Don't just throw them behind the boat and sit there and stare at them. If there's any kind of breeze at all, I like to take my bobber, throw it upwind, and let it drift the whole length of the boat until it gets behind the boat. So throw it 15, 20 yards ahead of the boat, let it drift down behind the boat till it's 15, 20 yards away, and you're literally covering water while your boat is sitting still. It works very, very well. I'd like to keep my hook, about 6 inches to a foot off the bottom. Devil's Lake walleye tend to stay very tight to the bottom, so I try to keep that outfit or my bait as close to the bottom as I can. If you get snagged up, again, just pull real hard. You'll break the fluorocarbon leader. All you got to do is put a new leader, maybe a new sinker and a hook on there, and you're right back in business one more time. So that's what I got for jigs, crankbaits, slip bobbers. Again, Devil's Lake, shallow water right now. Those back bays is where it's at. Again, north and west of Graham's Island is probably going to be your best bet starting the season off. Don't have to cast to shore. Don't be afraid to try out in the middle. Start out fishing fast. If you're not catching, slow things down. Vary it between jigs and plastics, crankbaits. Another great tip, if you're casting something and you see a follow, don't be afraid to stop your boat and throw bobbers out. Okay, if you see some fish following, there's some in the area. They never travel alone. There's always more than one. So make it a habit of looking into the water to see your lure come to the boat. Those white tips are pretty easy to see. Make sure you have a good pair of polarized sunglasses so you can see through the glare. And a lot of days, that tip off of having 1 or 2 fish follow, convincing you to throw a bobber out there with some live bait instead of a crankbait or a jig will definitely fill the boat up. A couple other things that we've got going on. Well, we've got a few questions. Go ahead. What are the questions, Jay?
We had a question from Daryl. He was wondering if you always cast cranks or do you troll them this early as well?
So, casting versus trolling. The question was, do you always cast or can you troll crankbaits as well? You can troll in the spring. I typically do not because of the shallow water that we're in. But if you are going to troll in the spring, I would recommend using monofilament line so the lure doesn't dive as quick as they might on a super line. And I would definitely look at lures with that shallow diving lip. I don't believe that letting 20 feet of line out with a number 5 flicker shad in 6 feet of water is the smartest way to go about it. Boat makes a lot of noise and it might not catch as many as you would want. So longer lead lengths, maybe even a planer board or two, which is something you don't see a lot in Devil's Lake. But absolutely, Daryl, you can troll in the spring and catch them. I'm telling you, you're cranking them 2 miles an hour with your reel. So what's the difference if your boat's going 2 miles an hour down the shoreline? We had another one, Jay?
Yeah, Cassie asks, and this goes back to your bobber setup, what kind of knot are you using to keep the bobber stops from slipping on the fire line?
Bobber stops and fire line, Cassie or Casey, however we say it. I use the regular commercially made bobber stops. If I'm having trouble with a bobber stop slipping, I will put another knot and butt it up against the first one. So when I tie my knots, and some of you might have noticed, maybe you didn't, I leave the ends on. I don't trim them. From time to time, they will get caught on the line guide and make my cast look like I don't know what I'm doing for the day. But I like to leave them long because as the string gets wet, I can get it even tighter and it grips even better. But if that slips, I will put a second one on there, tighten it as tight as I can, and trim the strings on the second one. And that second knot usually provides enough friction that the two together don't slip, but they still fit through your rod guides. So 2 knots is a great way to keep that from slipping on the super line. Any other questions? 2 weeks. What would be the best setup for depth and walleye? Still running a bobber and leech. So that's from Jordan. Jordan, I'm going to say 2 weeks from now, the fish might even be shallower than they are today. Last week we had some really warm temperatures. The fish crashed to the banks pretty hard, and then it got cold. And they're saying frost possibly Wednesday night or Thursday morning here in Devil's Lake. There's freeze warnings for the week already. I'll probably have long johns on the next 3 days guiding. I think that's going to push fish deep again. And then when it warms up the following week, we're seeing temperatures in the mid to upper 70s, maybe even the low 80s. When that water warms up, those fish are definitely going to move back to the bank. So it'll definitely still be shallow. Pitching jigs and crankbaits will get better as the water warms up a little. And bobbers and leeches are in my boat from the day the ice goes off till the day I run out of leeches. If I could keep them till the ice comes in the fall, I would. So I would recommend don't ever come to Devil's Lake without a bucket full of leeches if you can get them. Next question says, do you have a preference for leech size? I kind of have 2 preferences for leech sizes, and it all depends what I'm trying to do. If I am fishing by myself, if I am tournament fishing on Devil's Lake, or I have a group of guide clients that tells me all we want to do is catch big fish, meaning 20 inches or bigger, I will try to get the biggest leeches I can find. The giant jumbo leech, you know, the ones that are 2 or 3 inches before they start swimming, and when they start swimming they look too big to fish with. Those are incredible leeches for catching larger fish. The problem is, if you're fishing for table fare, you might not catch many. I'm not going to say little fish won't bite those leeches, but they tend to grab the leech and not the hook, and you don't catch as many. When I'm guiding, I like a leech that's about 1.5 inches before it starts swimming. It's about 3 inches when it's swimming in the water. That seems to be the size that I get the most bites on and catch the most fish, because the small fish or smaller fish, those 14 to 17 inches, still get that leech in their mouth. I still get a good hook set in them. I'm not going to say you don't still miss a lot of small fish with those smaller leeches, but you sure get a higher hooking percentage. Looks like we've got another question here. Seth Benton. I'm near Bismarck. If I don't want to fish the river or Sac, what's a good small lake around Bismarck? Well, Seth, it all depends what types of fish you want to catch. If you want to go for a little bit of drive, the Jamestown Reservoir is not too bad. You've got Spirit Wood Lake over that way that's actually got some zander in it. That's kind of a famous thing in North Dakota. If you want to do some other fishing than walleyes, Nelson Lake is a lot of fun. You get on some bass up that way. Sweetbriar has got a bunch of panfish and northern pike that can be a lot of fun to catch, and those are all smaller bodies of water as well. Maybe you want to check the Game and Fish website. There's a lot of those smaller sloughs in that part of the country just outside of Bismarck that are stocked with perch and pike primarily, some even with walleye that you might be able to get on. And Game and Fish does a great job of sharing those bodies of water. And don't forget Lake Audubon. I know that's a little bit of a drive, and you're all the way up there to Sac. But if it's really windy and you can't get on the big lake, try Lake Audubon. There's plenty of fish in there too. Lance asks, will you use artificial leeches? Lance, I do use an artificial leech from time to time. I'm a Berkeley Gulp fanatic. I have no affiliation with Berkeley. I am not sponsored or paid to endorse any Berkeley products, but the Berkeley Gulp is a really, really good substitute for live bait. The only live bait I carry in my boat anymore is a leech. And I have used the Gulp leeches, and I've used them with fair success. But under a bobber, not necessarily as good. On a jig where you're moving it up and down, it works pretty well. If there's a nice chop on the water, the artificial leech will work okay below a bobber. But dead flat calm days, I'm not going to put anything fake below a bobber. I'm going to put a live leech on there. But I love Gulp minnows. I love the Gulp killer crawlers on slow death. I love the Gulp fry on a spinner. Gulp minnow grubs are another favorite on a jig or a spinner. So yeah, I use artificial stuff quite a bit. So it looks like we're caught up on the questions there. So before we go, one more reminder. This seminar was brought to you by the Devil's Lake Tourism Bureau. I want to thank the folks over there for helping set all this up, at getting the promotions out so we can get everybody online and watching. Special thanks from you to them should be for helping with a shortcut. So when you get here, you've got a really good idea where to go, what to try, and what to do. Don't forget that this is also available on the Lake Region Anglers website. It's available on, or not website, but Facebook page. It's available on my Facebook page, Johnnie Candle Professional Angler, and it's also viewable on the Devil's Lake Chamber Walleye Tournament Facebook page. So go check those out as well. Couple things before we get going tonight, before we sign off. A few events going on in Devil's Lake that if you're up here fishing, you may also want to check out. Devil's Run, June 4th and 5th. One of the largest, I don't know if I want to call it antique car shows or show car shows, hot rod shows. I'm sure my next door neighbor, Stan Ornis, if he's watching right now, is getting mad at me because I don't know enough about the event that he's put on for, holy cow, it's got to be going on 3 decades now that Devil's Run has been here in Devil's Lake. They'll bring hot rods from Canada all across the United States. It's an absolute great weekend, lots of good food, lots of music, burnout contests, loud motors, cruise night up and down Main Street, a lot of fun. So if you're in town June 4th and 5th doing some fishing, don't forget to go downtown and check out Devil's Run. June 11th and 10th, 11th, 10th, 11th and 12th, if I could speak. The PBR Pro Rodeo will be at the Peterson Arena. The Peterson Arena is just west of Devil's Lake on Highway 19. That should be a really good time if you're into what's that, Dust and Mud and Guts and Blood. I think Garth Brooks sang a song about rodeo and bulls and all that kind of stuff. So that's a good time. Again, lots of good people come out. Those cowboy types are a very, very friendly sort, and we're glad to have them here in town. So get out there and enjoy the rodeo. Art Fest on June 19th. We have, that's downtown Devil's Lake. Food trucks, live entertainment every hour, live art demonstrations, art showcases, many, many vendors out on the sidewalk. Lots of fun things to do there on June the 19th. And maybe my favorite event of the summer is the Devil's Lake Chamber Fishing Tournament, June 24th through the 26th. It's out of Grams Island State Park. We pay out over 100% back to the anglers, so we pay out more than we bring in. There's 125 teams before it's full. There still is room available. Get your application at devilslakend.com. We also throw a bonus in if the tournament fills up. The chamber adds an extra $1,500 to the purse. And this year, for the first time in a long time, or possibly ever, it is a walleye-only tournament. So all the prizes we had over the years for big pike, big perch, big white bass, all of that stuff went into the walleye prize package. So we're paying multiple big walleye each day. Big walleye overall for the tournament gets a prize. So come on out to the Chamber Fishing Tournament June 24th through the 26th and check it out. I see one more question, and then I'm going to wrap it up. It says, Johnny, do you utilize Doc's sonar? And Jason, what I'm assuming that you're talking about are the historical overlays of Devil's Lake available for your GPS unit. Dr. Sonar makes a product that works on Humminbird units only, on Lowrance units only. Lake Master also makes a similar product for a Humminbird unit, and yes, I do utilize that. For those of you that don't know, you can get historical imagery, aerial photographs of Devil's Lake from previous years. The year that I use is 1990. You can put that overlay on your GPS, and instead of seeing the contour map for Devil's Lake today, you see the aerial image of Devil's Lake from 1990. So every tree row, every shelter belt, every brush pile, every rock pile, every road that was above water in 1990 but now underwater, you can see it and drive right to it, troll right down it, fish right beside it, know where things are so you don't hit them while you're navigating. And it's a very, very, very powerful tool. If anyone wants more information on that, go ahead and find me on Facebook. Again, Johnnie Candle, Professional Angler. Send me a private message, and I will send you links to get that information and learn how to use it. I'd be glad to help you out that way. So I think it's 10 minutes to 8. We have no more questions coming along, so I'm going to go ahead and wrap things up. I want to thank everybody for tuning in. We had at one point, it looked like about 130 viewers tonight, so thank you much for taking time out of your day. If you live to the west of Devil's Lake, please shut your windows and doors so the wind will stop blowing and we can get out on the lake and catch fish. If you're heading up for the weekend or later this week, you see me on the water, give me a wave, honk your horn, I'll wave back. Maybe we'll be able to chat in the parking lot. But until then, have a great week. Get up here, catch a lot of fish, and we'll talk to you soon. Take care. Have a great night.